Starting with the original backpack, modeled here by Luke. Underneath all of these pans is normally a huge fire, and it has to run 24/7. It's really steaming. We want to let that steam out of the roof. It's like the original sunroof. Hi everyone, my name's Ranger M, and I work at Catfish Creek Conservation Authority. I'm the community outreach technician, and that means I do a lot of this, chatting about all things nature and conservation with kids, adults, teachers, everyone. I love to knowledge share, and that's just what I'm going to do with you. So come on, let's go learn with Ranger M. Hi everyone, it's March, and that normally means one thing for me, maple syrup season. I'm at Springwater Conservation Area where we normally host a Springwater Maple Syrup Festival, but this year, unfortunately, it was canceled due to the global pandemic. So we have the whole area to ourselves to learn all about maple syrup. We're going to learn how to tap a tree, how to ID a sugar maple, and all about the history of maple syrup production in Ontario. So let's start at the beginning. What tree do we tap? Most trees produce sap, but only one tree produces the sweetest sap, and that's a sugar maple. This tree right here. But speaking of sap, what even is sap? It's actually just water and sugar, 98% water and 2% sugar. Sap is really important to trees. It's actually a source of food for them. They use photosynthesis to produce sap. So they bring in CO2, the sunlight, and water through their leaves and produce these sugars and the sap. But it's wintertime, there's no leaves, so how are they producing the sap? They actually produced it in the summer when they had their leaves, and they stored it in their roots. Now, because it's March, we know one thing, it's becoming springtime. It's warming up during the day and it's still cooling down at night. And the sap in the roots is starting to travel in the tree. So when it warms up during the day, the sap all the way in the roots is starting to travel up the tree trunk, just like an elevator. It goes up and then it goes back down at night. So that's how the trees is getting the sap to the branches, which are starting to produce buds. We can't just tap any sugar maple tree. We have to make sure it's mature enough. So a tree actually has to be 25 centimeters in diameter before we can tap it. And then depending on how big the tree is, we could tap it even twice or 3 times. Before we tap a sugar maple tree, we have to learn how to identify a sugar maple tree. The easiest way is in the summertime when the trees still have its leaves. The leaf is a dark green color with a lighter green underside. They also have 5 lobes, and the lobes are U-shaped, not V, not very sharp. However, if you're identifying a sugar maple tree in the wintertime, you can use the branching or the bark. Maple trees are one of the few tree species that have opposite branching. So that means when the little branches leave a branch, they are directly leaving opposite to each other, whereas different trees have alternate branching, so one over here and one down there. If you're using the bark to identify a sugar maple, it has a grayish to dark brown color, and as it matures, it gets deep ridges or furrows into the bark, as well as the edges of the bark start to peel upwards. Now that we know how to ID a sugar maple tree, we need to make sure we have all of the proper tools to help us tap that tree. So you'll need a bucket, a lid, a drill, a hammer, and a spile. A spile is what goes into the tree and helps pull the sap out and into your bucket. A lid is important when tapping trees because it helps keep out a lot of insects, dirt, other things, but it helps keep out rain and snow. So sap already has a high concentration of water. We don't want to add even more water into there to burn off. Plus, it helps keep out hungry mammals that love maple sap. So I have Noah here, one of our conservation lands technicians.
Hi everybody.
And he's going to show us how to tap a tree. Now that we have all the proper tools, we're going to start drilling. And when you drill, you have to remember that you're not going too deep. You only have to go about 6 to 8 centimeters into the tree. When drilling, it helps to do at an upward direction because obviously gravity is going to help bring the sap down and through the spile and into your bucket. You do want to try and tap your tree on the south side, as that is the side that will get more sunlight and therefore warm the tree more, meaning more sap. Once you've drilled your hole, you're going to bring the spile up to the hole and then just tap it in with the hammer, and then you set your bucket onto the spile with the lid on top. Now that we know how to identify a sugar maple tree and how to tap it, we're going to go learn about the history of maple syrup production. Do you know how many buckets of maple sap you need to make 1 bucket of maple syrup? you know how many buckets of maple sap you need to make 1 bucket of maple syrup? For maple sap, you need 40 buckets of sap to make 1 bucket of syrup. It's an energy-intensive process, but since maple sap is 98% water, you need to burn off all that water to get the sugar to make maple syrup. Nobody is quite certain how long humans have been practicing the art and science of producing maple syrup. But we do know it was indigenous people who discovered and harvested maple sap first. It is said that the first people witnessed red squirrels cutting into the bark of sugar maples, leaving the tree and then coming back when a sap had solidified on the side of the tree and licked away at the sap. Ever since, tribes like the Iroquois, Ojibwe, and the Algonquin would harvest maple sap. The Algonquin word for maple syrup is sinsabukwad, and it means to draw from the wood. Since this was a considerable amount of time ago, they didn't have drills and modern technology like we do. So it is said that indigenous people would use their axes and tools made of stone to chip away at the bark and use birch bark bowls to collect the sap. A long time ago, we didn't have pots and pans either. They had wooden containers they made out of trees, and you can't easily put those over a fire to cook away the maple sap. So how did they cook the maple sap? They would actually heat up rocks and stones in the fire, and they would put those hot rocks into the maple sap, and it would evaporate the water. This was an incredibly slow and laborious job, but they eventually made our first maple product, maple sugar, not syrup. Syrup is perishable and sugar can be stored easily. So this was mostly a family affair. The whole family would move into the forest, and the women would do most of the cooking and collection of the sap, with men and children making firewood and getting food to keep everyone nice and fed during the winter months. The sugar they produced became a great commodity, and it was traded for furs, for other things, and eventually they traded with the first people who came from Europe, the French. With the European settlers came a whole bunch of new practices and tools that would shape the maple syrup production industry into what it is today, starting with the original backpack, modeled here by Luke. This is called a yoke, and it holds 2 buckets, and it was allowing them to double the amount of sap they could bring out on one trip. The European settlers also brought over cast iron, and this really helped the maple syrup production. So this is called the 3-kettle system, and they have 3 kettles of cast iron. They would put their cold sap in this first kettle, and as that warmed up, they would move it to the second kettle, so when they added new sap, it wouldn't cool down what's already warm. In this kettle, as it would warm up and get thicker, they would move it to the last and finishing kettle. Now normally each kettle would have a fire underneath it, and it would go 24/7. This system didn't have much changes for about 200 years until the invention of tin. So 2 main differences happened. The invention of tin, and we moved the entire operation inside. As you can see, the pans are flat on the bottom, and that means they're getting more heat to a greater surface area. And that means the entire operation is speeding up and it's evaporating more water quicker. Underneath all of these pans is normally a huge fire, and it has to run 24/7. It's called an arch. Now this system is very similar to the one outside. There's 3 pans, and in the first pan you put your cold sap in this nice big pan, and as it warms up, we move it to the second pan. And then as this pan heats up and thickens up, we're going to move it to the last finishing pan. Now this was still a time before thermometers, so how do we know when our maple syrup is done? Well, it actually comes down to the thickness of the syrup in the finishing pan. So we use this fancy ladle that has a flat edge, and it'll tell us if it's done or not. So if it was perfectly done syrup, it would come out the same length of the ladle all the way down to the bottom. But this syrup isn't done because it goes thinner and it twists around each other. So we still know it has to cook. So as the fire is going 24/7 and we're cooking maple syrup 24/7, it gets pretty steamy. When we have this fire going all the time, it's really steaming. So steam rises. We want to let that steam out of the roof. So we're going to use a system of pulleys to help us lift these very heavy windows on the roof. It's like the original sunroof. Now once their maple syrup was done, they couldn't just package it right away. They had to filter it. First they used a sieve to get the big stuff, And then they would use sheep's wool filter to get what's known as sugar sand. It's little crystal-like sand that is always a byproduct of maple syrup. Once it went through these processes, it was ready to be put on some pancakes and eaten. Did you know Canada is responsible for over 90% of the world's maple syrup production? Did you know Canada is responsible for over 90% of the world's maple syrup production? The other 10% comes from Vermont in the northern part of the USA. Now, this system of maple syrup production stayed pretty consistent until the 1860s, when a farmer created a new, innovative way to make maple syrup. This is called the evaporator. And just like the 3-pan method and the kettles outside, it has 3 parts to it. The first part is a big tank outside that holds the cold sap. It then travels through a tube into this big part here. That it has a series of flues where the sap goes up and down, and the fire can reach through the flues and heat the sap even quicker than the 3-pan method. And this is the final part, the finishing pan. Since we're in modern days, we have a couple different ways to tell us when the maple syrup is done. The first is a thermometer, which we stick in the finishing pan, and it'll tell us that once we get to 104 degrees, that's when we have delicious maple syrup. Another method is the hydrometer, and it measures the specific gravity of liquids. So the density of water compared to the density of liquid in it. It'll move up and down depending on where it is. Then we have the refractometer that measures Brix, or sugar content. So we put a little dab of maple syrup on the lens here, then we hold it up to the light and we look through it, and once it hits 66, that's when we have Ontario Grade A maple syrup. And that's our current method of making maple syrup in Ontario. Do you know how many different types of maple syrup there are? Do you know how many different types of maple syrup there are? There are 4 different types of maple syrup, and they all have the same makings, vitamins, minerals, and amino acids as each other, but they differ in color and taste. We have gold, the lightest syrup, and this would be the first batch of syrup you get in the season. Amber, a very common syrup that people love. Dark, which has a lot of flavor, and personally it's my favorite. And lastly, we have very dark, which is very, very dark in color, almost like molasses. And it's actually used more in baking, and it would be the last batch you would get in the maple syrup season. We're in the most southern part of Springwater Forest, where we would normally have about 200 trees tapped. We don't tap trees exclusively to make maple syrup. We do it more for educational purposes. And normally big operations would have upwards of 1,000 trees tapped. It's unfortunate that we couldn't run the Maple Syrup Festival this year, but thank you for joining me in learning about how to identify sugar maples, how to tap a tree, and all about the history of maple syrup production. For this activity, I thought what better pairing with maple syrup than making pancakes. So let's get into it. We're gonna make pancakes from scratch today. I have 1.5 cups of flour, 3 tablespoons of sugar, 3 tablespoons of baking powder, really easy to remember, 3 tablespoons of oil, a cup of milk, and 1 egg. Now that you have all your ingredients in, just mix it up. You want to make sure all the ingredients are combined, but the batter will be a bit fluffy. And you know it'll be done. It looks just like that. So you can either use a hot plate or a frying pan. I find my pancakes taste better with a frying pan, so that's what I'm gonna use. You wanna make sure you have a flipper and some oil. Now, my tip for my pancakes is actually using quite a bit of oil in the pan, because then you get the crispy edges around the pancakes. I never measure, so I would guess 1.5 tablespoons. Depending on the size of pancakes you want, just pour them into the pan. You can see on the pancake that a couple bubbles are popping, but you want to wait until basically the whole surface of pancake is kind of bubbling. I like nice and golden pancakes, but you can see because of the oil, the edges are nice and crispy. Personally, I like to top my pancakes with a little bit of butter or margarine. Even when you were cooking your pancakes, you could have added stuff like chocolate chips, blueberries, banana. Then I've got my obscenely large amount of maple syrup from Springwater. And now for the taste test. Now that's a perfect pancake. Way back in episode 1, we did a question and answer period. There were so many great questions we couldn't get to them all. So here's all the ones that asked all about me. What's your favorite endangered animal? My favorite endangered animal is the eastern hognose snake. I don't know if you guys have ever seen a hognose snake, but it is probably the cutest snake, if you can define a snake as cute, in the wild. It has an upturned nose, that's where it gets its name, hognose snake. And it's a relatively short snake in length. And they're really cool with their defense mechanisms. First, they'll rear their body and flatten their head to make them look like a cobra. But they are completely harmless. They will even try and strike at you, but they strike with their mouth closed. So they won't even bite you. And then if that doesn't work to scare their predators away, they then play dead. They actually play dead so well they kind of go into a state, and they can stay like that for up to an hour with its tongue out and everything. Are you outdoors all day, every day? Before the COVID-19 pandemic, I was working outside a majority of the time. A couple examples were the maple syrup festival that was taking place just before the pandemic. We were outside every day. I was actually the interpreter on the wagon. I also would do recreational activities most days. In the winter time, it was hikes and snowshoeing. In the summertime, it's canoeing, kayaking, hiking, bird watching, all of those fun things. And then also throughout the year, I do several educational programs. So that's with local schools and other groups. I take them all outside and at our different properties as well. I also help out with some watershed stewardship projects. This includes tree planting, restoration projects, and also our woodlot management. This includes teaching some local youth how to use a chainsaw properly. I also work in the campground. I do different activities with the campers, and I also help run our day camp called the Wild Rangers. However, there are some days I have to stay in the office and do my other job duties that include writing grant applications and different fundraising programs, also doing social media and communication work, and then writing new education programming. What's your favorite part of the job? My favorite part of my job is definitely providing educational opportunities. I love sharing my enthusiasm for nature and teaching the next generation about all things nature and conservation, and how you can just find littlest things to appreciate and love in nature. How did you become a ranger? What did you learn or do to become so interested? I was always extremely passionate about the environment and really interested in working in conservation and nature. In high school, I was part of the Environment Club and also the Environment Leadership Program at East Elgin Secondary School. This program allowed me to get a lot of insight on different career opportunities and access to several different recreational opportunities to try out. After high school, I went to university. I went to Dalhousie in Halifax, Nova Scotia. There, I did a Bachelor of Sciences. I completed a double major in environmental sciences and environment, society, and sustainability. I minored in biology, and then I specialized in environmental impact assessment. All that really means is I learned a lot about the environment, and I fell in love with sustainability. The idea of working in a cohesive manner of thinking about the economy, the environment, and society to create a sustainable world. And then after university, I came back to Ontario. I had several different jobs, and then I landed here at Catfish Creek Conservation Authority. I do actually have a long history at the Catfish Creek Conservation Authority. I started in high school where I did a co-op placement, and then I worked in the campground for 3 years. And then now I've completed a couple different contracts and job positions, and where I have become now Ranger M, the Community Outreach Technician. The name and idea of Ranger M really came down to me creating a name for my education programs here at Catfish. There was a guy who worked here before who was always called Ranger Ed, so I thought it'd be funny to be Ranger M. And then a couple of my friends in the ELP program really grew it to what it is today, and now I'm just always referred to as Ranger M. Thank you for watching with me this episode, and also for all of season 1. It was a great time, and now you can watch some bloopers from all of season 1. Thank you and see you in nature. Finnegan, touch. I've got a lot more. Buckle up, Scott. We're in for a wild ride. Okay, I'll just restart. The Carolinian life zone is on. As I've mentioned before, here we are. This is a trillium, which is Ontario's nature plant. This white fence is to protect it from deer because deer love fences. And then also recreational opportunities. Don't know how to say the word opportunities, so you know what? I'll just say it all again and allow spruits to grow out of the spruits. Oh my God. You didn't say anything. Scott, do you get this with every person? You could call them the original sunroofs. Roofs or roofs? 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 What is it?
You want to do that one more time? Let's do it.
Now we're gonna go check out parts of their farm. There's the best forest. Welcome to Springwater, Carolyn. I tried to be cool there. Messed it up. Okay. I don't know. I'll just wait a second. Sorry. Sneaky, sneaky. How do I want to word it? I'll do it again. And break. And they cause the water to go up over top of the... That was so good. Is that good? Do my hands look stupid? You're psyching me out, sorry. I thought you were
done, that's why I moved.
Oh, okay. Word vomit. Can I keep going? Okay. This is the Herb Kebble wetland. It's a 24-acre provide shade as well as space. No. Was it good up to that point? Was that good up till that point? We also... Look at the turtle. He's just glaring. Be free! I should have brought a spoon. I should have brought a spoon. Cool, 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 cool. Is that okay or did it not flow? It didn't flow. So we're gonna use these really big nets. Do-do. No, I don't want to say that. You can see here, can you zoom in this far? Substance is very porous, it's not very permeable. Permeable. So that's a cut. It's not supposed to hold soil or water that well. Is it really awkward if I refill it? Like if we take a minute?
Turned off now?
No.
Still got a hot mic?
We're gonna go meet with Roger and Romina, the owners of our fields.
Oh, I can't wait.
No, that's no.
You gotta be looking at her. Camera. It's really weird.
Absolutely. As you can see on the turtle.
On the turtle. Cool. Oh, how's that? That's fun. And I'm done.